Welcome to another episode of Ro's Resource Room. Today, I have a special guest who will be speaking at convention this year. Please introduce yourself. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hi, so I'm Alicia Hunt. I am a homeschooling mom in the North Hills of Pittsburgh area. And I've been working with CHAP off and on for the last several years. So we're excited to come to convention again this year and actually be speaking and sharing some information with our fellow community members.
Awesome. So it's funny. Typically, I ask people, like, how do you pronounce your name? And my middle name is the same as your first name. But I've heard
Ah!
so many variations. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to assume. I'm going to let her say her name. I actually say Alicia. So,
Mhm.
but I'm not surprised that you say Alicia. That's typically
Yep.
what I hear. All right. So tell us about your homeschooling journey. Are you one of those people who are like, the minute I had kids, I just knew I wanted to homeschool my babies? Or were you the one like dragging, kicking, and screaming? Like, what exactly did your journey look like?
So I was not homeschooled myself. My
Mhm.
husband and I both had lovely public school experiences. We never necessarily saw ourselves homeschooling our kids, but we did start looking at what our educational options were for our kids in about 2016.
Mhm.
And that is when God placed a few very interesting people in my life that were homeschooling and had lots of homeschooling experience. And He just kept plopping these people into our lives. And I was the first one to say, maybe this is an option for us. And my husband was a little hesitant at first, but then the more he researched and spoke with people, he became very interested and passionate about it as well. Um, so originally it just started off that we were going to homeschool our kids during their preschool years. I had a lot of experience in that area of child development. I'd run a private preschool for a number of years. So I was very confident that we could do that. And I really didn't want to send them off anywhere. I wanted
Yeah.
to be able to take them to the museum and to the park and, all of these great adventures, and didn't want to be tied down to a schedule that they needed to follow with a school. So that's kind of how we started, was we were going to homeschool for these preschool years. And then our oldest got a little older and it was time for kindergarten. And we thought, well, we don't want to do that either.
Wow.
And then we just kind of continued on that path, and just, God has provided for us every year as far as, outlets for them and resources and placing people in our lives to encourage us on our journey. And we've been able to encourage others as well. So it's been really amazing to be on this journey, unexpected as it
Mhm.
was. It's been fun.
That's awesome. It's so God is like such an amazing God of relationships. He uses people and just like plant seeds here and there, and he just like drops this little conversation here and then sows a seed in your heart. So I'm not surprised that he used people to get you on this journey. And what is the age? Like, how long have you been doing this now?
Yeah, so my oldest is 11. She's in
Mhm.
fifth grade this year. And then I have a son that's in third grade. He's 9. And then I have a son that's in kindergarten that's 6. So we're just now entering those middle school years next year. So that's kind of a whole new ball game of things that we're exploring and looking into. Um, so yeah, always on your toes and always looking for the next thing. We always kind of went with the attitude of we'll take it year by
Yeah.
year, and make decisions, but every year he's provided, and it's been an interesting adventure, like I said, that we just kind of keep on and taking it one year at a time, but it's always been good.
I hear you. So one of the things you talked about was the preschool that you operated, and then you did preschool as a homeschool. Like a lot of neuroscience now is saying 0 to 3, and this is not even new. 0 to 3 is that age where babies are sponges and it's like their most critical years. What have you noticed either with the children that you've had in preschool and the differences when you brought your own child home? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, so that was one of my big concerns when I was working in the school industry.
Hmm.
There's a lot of research out there, right? We've been researching kids education for years and
Yeah.
years now. There's a lot of good solid research. Um, but you still see public institutions going against that research. Um,
Mm.
a lot of my work I was doing, kids were unhappy, parents were unhappy, teachers were unhappy, administrative staff was unhappy, but yet we were still doing the same things and nothing was
Wow.
changing. And that was, again, I had a very positive public school
Yeah.
life. We weren't necessarily against all of that, but we just were looking and just wanted more for our kids and wanted a different life. So for my kids, especially in the preschool age, research shows play is best.
Yeah.
And that is what is best for them. So in those early years, I mean, we just did so much, especially with my older two. My youngest had a little bit of a different preschool experience because he was a kid that was during the COVID years. So
Right.
his experience did look different than the other two. But just, yeah, the hours that we spent at
Mm.
parks and museums and playing with other kids and things. My kids still remember experiences that they had at those age levels, and they've been able to build on those experiences throughout the years. That I am so thankful the people that encouraged us to do those things and not worry about them
Mm.
just sitting still for hours and doing workbook pages and
Oh my gosh.
doing just those mundane things, that how much they were going to get out of being able to play and just the imaginative play that they still have. I mean, even my fifth grader, that she still is just very imaginative and very playful, and they just don't have the stress that a lot of their school peers have, and they're still just so entertained by the simplest things. And I'm so glad that they've been able to have that experience.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that latter piece that you talked about in terms of being entertaining, just that in a sense of like flying a kite, skipping rocks, watching the sunset, like those things versus, oh, let me see what the newest video game is and things of that nature. So I could definitely relate to that. One of the things that really ignited something for me is when you said play is best. Now, I know that and I've heard that, but theoretically and practically, I don't always make that a priority. And a part of it is the way I grew up. I kept hearing, this is not about fun. This is not about entertainment. This is not how it's supposed to be, right? So I always thought that play was one thing that you did, and then work was another thing that you did. You never intermixed it. So like even when I have my kids doing certain math programs and they're gamifying, and I'm like, what is this? But I see the impact, right? So I say all that to say, with these younger babies, I've also noticed that they're introducing worksheets earlier. Like babies are coming home with worksheets, and I'm like, do you even have the muscle strength to be holding the pencil? Do you even, like, I guess my question to you would be, if we're seeing the research and we're seeing the outcome of not following the research, like, why do you think that we're continually doing that thing that's not working?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like fear-based, right? Like we all,
Mm,
like parenting's hard. We want the best for our kids. We want them to be successful adults. And to some degree, the logic of earlier is better kind of makes sense,
mm,
that there's, that's something people kind of can understand, right? But a lot of times people are worried that they're missing out on something if they're not doing these things. But a lot of times I feel like we don't step back and think of what are they missing out on if we're spending our time doing these things. And, like I had somebody tell me once, they only have so many years to dig holes in the ground and think they're going to make it to the other side of the world. Those years are so fleeting. And once they're gone, you just don't get those back.
mm.
My husband and I are very, we are lifelong learners. We are always learning new things. We're always investigating new things. I look at these kids, they have their entire lives to master whatever it is that they want to master. But I only have so many years in their younger years where they just get to try as many things as they want. And that's really our goal for them as in their youth, is for them to just try as many things as they possibly can and dabble in as many things as they can. And then when they're adults, they can choose what things that they want to fully invest all of their time into. Um, but it's nothing for my husband to need to figure out how to fix the dishwasher. And he looks up the information, he figures
Yeah,
it out, he fixes the dishes,
right.
So
And he
like
didn't go
we're
to school for that,
constantly,
right?
yeah, like we're constantly learning and trying to figure out new things. And those are really the skills that we want our kids to have. We want them to be problem solvers. We want them to have the confidence to investigate and learn whatever it is that they need to do. And I even see that like in my homeschooling journey, I didn't
Mhm.
know very much about homeschooling at all.
Yeah.
And that was something I had to learn as an adult. How do I do this? How do I fill out this paperwork? Who do I have to submit it to? How do I, come up with what curriculum I'm going to use for them and activities that we're going to do for them. And I mean, again, even all of us as parents, you figure that out. How do I potty train this kid?
Yeah.
You know, how do I get them to not eat something other than cookies? You know, like all of these hard things.
Yeah.
But you figure it out and God equips you with those things. And that's, you know, again, just kind of what we want for our kids. We want them to have a childhood, enjoy those years, appreciate hard work, appreciate that there's always going to be new things for them to have to learn, and
Yeah.
providing them with those skills to do so.
You're 100% spot on, because I was asking the question, like, why would the institution continue to do something if they're not seeing the fruit or the expectation? But you're 100% right. It's fear-based. Like, what if we go on the other side and that doesn't work either, right? And like, you don't know a lot of my background, so I'll share. Like, I've been homeschooling only for 2 years, right? So it's not like I've done birth through whatever. My kids are 9, 7, and 1. So I'm gonna do a stage I've never ever done before, right? But the reason I share that is I understand what it means to have to go to work and have no one to watch your kids, right? My husband has to go to work. I have to go to work. We need daycare. We need childcare. So I understand why that system is important. What I didn't understand is, why are we doing the things that are not working? Why are we saying, okay, so if the child can't read by this age, let's just put them in the system earlier. It's not that they need to be in the system early, because all we're doing is putting them earlier in the broken system, right? Versus figuring out what was not working and then making that work. So I really appreciate your perspective in terms of, it's fair. Like, what if you do the other part and it doesn't work? What if you try the other way and it doesn't work? I was talking to a girlfriend from Russia, and she was like, kids don't go to school this early in Russia. You know, they don't have formal education until way much later. In that time, they're playing. And what I hear you saying is, we need to teach kids how to learn versus spoon feeding them what to learn, right? So later on in your life, you can say, all right, well, how do I figure out how to fill out this form? How do I figure out who to call? Those are skills that you've learned over time, whether it came from the public system, the private system, homeschooling, but that's what we need to give our kids.
Absolutely. And that's, I mean, homeschooling has just really given our kids the time to explore things
Mhm.
that would not have been accessible to them in a public school system.
Right?
Um, and that's, you know, there's a lot of kids that the public school system works for them. You
Of
know,
course.
that it's, you know, it does work. Families all have different situations and different things. Um, but the benefits of just our kids being able to do other things, we, even at their young age, have
Mhm.
been able to see. I mean, that's my daughter this year had a super interest in graphic design. She spent a lot of time taking graphic design courses and you know, designing a multitude of posters and
Mhm.
t-shirts and all kinds of things. And that's not something a fifth grader would have had access to in the public school system. Maybe at the
Right.
high school level, she would have been able to do that. But there are other areas in her academics that are hard for her. You know, it's not that like just
Mhm.
being at home, everything's super easy.
Right.
But because we have the time to slow down and customize their education. And that's my background was working with a lot of kids with individualized education plans that had special needs. But isn't it amazing to be able to give every kid an individualized education plan? And we're lucky enough to be able to do that for our kids.
Yeah. I literally just had this conversation 2 days ago. I was talking to a grandmom who is homeschooling her granddaughter, and she said that she also worked with children with special needs. And I said, you know, I've heard of this term IEP, individualized education plan, so many times over the last 2 years. And it's not because of my children, it's because I started doing maternal health advocacy, and all the moms were saying, my kid needs an IEP. And I'm like, what is this thing? And then when I looked it up, I'm like, well, doesn't every kid need an IEP? Like, if we're individuals, like we have, you know, different fingerprints, right? Don't we all learn in our own way? And we should have that customized education. But logically, that's impossible when you have 27 or 35 or even 15 kids. Because even when I teach my two older boys who are 9 and 7, they need different approaches. Some need a spiral approach, some need a master approach, some need hands-on, some need just tell me one time and I get it, like stop repeating, I get it, right? You know, so it's interesting that you talked about that customization and the interest-led piece. You know, math can be taught in so many different ways. If your kid likes Legos, grab some Legos and have them add 2 plus 3, right? It doesn't have to be paper and pen or this formal system. You can weave in their interest in everything. And the last thing I'll say is you're 100% right about the time that it gives you to explore. Because when my older boys were in private school, they would get home so late and we barely had time for recreation or anything else. It was literally come home, do your homework, bath time, bedtime, that's it. And now they're like, oh, wow, we have so much time to do all these things because we do a lot, but we're still wrapped up at a very early time. So you brought up a lot. You have so much wealth of information. Tell us what you're going to be talking about at CHAP.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm going to talk about is socialization, because that is definitely a question that is always a concern for new moms that are looking into homeschooling. Dads are concerned,
Yeah,
if mom's the one that's come up with this idea that they're going to
yeah,
homeschool their kids. It's a question that we get from, we ask ourselves, dads ask, grandparents ask, aunts and uncles ask, the lady at the grocery store ask. It's a question that everybody gets at some point. And once you get into homeschooling, it's laughable, right? Like
yeah.
when you get that question, it's like, oh, if you only knew.
Hmm.
But that's one of the things we're going to be talking about is socialization. What does that look like for a homeschooler? How do you look for resources to calm that fear? And how do you answer that question for
Hmm.
people that have concerns? And I do encourage people that, like, when your family has concerns, most of the time they're coming from a place of love. They love your
Yes.
kids and they have concerns. And it's our job to help confirm to them that, we understand that concern and it's something that we're aware of too. And it's something that we're going to work on. And it's, they're coming from a place of love. So this is, homeschooling has a lot of times people don't know anybody else that homeschools. I mean, it's
Yeah.
definitely becoming a lot more common, a lot more popular, especially even in the last 2 years. So a lot of times other generations have never met another homeschooler, or
Yeah.
maybe they had like that one neighbor
That
up the street,
one.
never left the house, their mom, or that one
Never
weird
made eye contact. Yeah.
yeah, so like it's not something that people are super familiar with. But definitely once you get into the homeschooling community, you're like, oh gosh, this is like not a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was at a church function on Sunday and I had a young mom who was looking at homeschooling her kindergartner, and that was her number one concern is, well, what about
Mhm.
socialization? Will she have friends? I said, it's so funny that you're bringing this up
I know.
because I'm going to talk about that and assure people that it is not a concern. Um, yeah, right now, I look at our schedule and think, what day do we get to stay home?
I am so busy and like my schedule, like I color code my schedule and the boys have blue and I'm like, there's just way too much blue stuff on my calendar. Like this morning I went to this mountainous area and then we did a hike and then from there it took us into the beach and that was from 9 to 2. I'm like, that's a whole school day in public school, right? Like, what do you mean you're taking my whole morning? But I completely hear you. I didn't realize that socialization and the concept of being in class with kids your age was actually Darwinism. I didn't realize that until probably last year. So I would talk to my friends who are like in their 40s and they'll say, oh, I just can't find friends. I just can't meet friends in this area. Or all the friends have this group. So either they can only find mommy friends or they can't find these kind of friends, right? And what I realized is we were so socialized to believe all your friends had to be the same age. And I would say to them, so you mean no one lives in your neighborhood? And they were like, bro, you know what I mean? And I'm like, no, what I'm trying to say is your mind is telling you that your friend has to be the same age, plus or minus a few months to qualify to be your friend. If there's someone in your neighborhood who's 5 years older, can they not be your friend? 5 years younger, can they not be your friend? No, because our public school minds or traditional school minds have told us your friend should be born in this year, right? And that's really that Darwinism concept of eight-year-olds should be in class together and 6-year-olds should be in class together. And then that feeds into our socialization. Last week I went to a church event and this woman I haven't seen in 4 years said, how are the kids? It was like Friday at 10. She was like, oh, why are the kids not in school? And I said, oh, we started homeschooling. And she goes, oh, you're not concerned about socialization. And I go, yeah, that's why I homeschool them. I am so concerned about what they're going to be socialized in the area that we live in that I needed to pull them out. But what I was taken aback by was I want to say ignorance, meaning lack of knowledge, because it's not that she has heard something or experienced something. That's just the thought that everyone has. So when I challenged it, she was kind of like, yeah, I don't really know anyone who's homeschooled. I don't really know if there's an issue with socialization, but that's what everyone always asks. Well, let's step back a bit, right? So I just think it's so interesting how we just kind of hear something and run with it versus actually thinking through it. Because if I'm dragging my kids to the bank, dragging them to the supermarket, dragging them all over, they're being socialized. They're going everywhere, right? So I guess the question is, aren't you concerned about them not being socialized only with kids who are their age? And I'm not.
Well, and that's, I mean, I literally have had people stop us in restaurants, in the grocery store, at, when we've been out and about in the community, and people have complimented me on how communicative my kids are. And they're like, wow, like, where do they go to school? You should thank their teacher. And that's sometimes, I'm in the grocery store and I'm just like trying to run an errand real quick. And I'm like, well, thank you so much. Move on. But it is funny how God even puts those people in your life to just whisper that in your ear at those times. And then there's other times where, you do have time to talk with people and you say, well, actually, they're homeschooled. And people are like shocked by that. But then at the same time, they're like, oh, like, especially older people, a lot of times older gentlemen particularly will stop us in the store or in restaurants and just we were actually on vacation in the Williamsburg area, and there was a gentleman that came up to our table and said he was so thrilled to see kids sitting and having a conversation with their parents, not on devices, to the point where he gave each one of our children $1. I was like, can I give them $1? And that just, those situations happen probably every 6 months, if not more frequently, that a stranger, makes a comment about it. And but it's also it's like, what is this world that we're living in that
I
this is
know.
impressive to you that a
I
kid can walk
know.
through the grocery store and get groceries. But again, those are the things that like I want my kids to be able to do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
That if they never become proficient in geometry, I'm okay. I would rather them be able to do some of these basic life skills.
I agree.
Yeah. So I understand people. I mean, it definitely was a question I asked,
Mhm.
and that's, all of those questions that people ask, will my kid be able to go to prom? In our area, there's 5 homeschool proms that
Oh,
you can pick
wow.
from for kids to go to. It's just so many of those things. And any situation where there hasn't already been a solution,
Hmm.
we as parents have been able to start a group or find some other like-minded people and have that occur. And balancing too that every kid is different, right? Like
Right.
I have some that have more social needs than others.
Hmm.
Um, but then I also look at it as an adult, like how many people are you still in touch with from high school as a grown
Yeah.
adult?
Yeah, that's a
I
good
mean,
point.
now we do have social media, so we're, a little bit more connection than maybe what we were in years past. Um, how many, we all have if you were in public school, there were all years that like you were in a classroom of 20 kids and you just didn't really connect with any
That's true.
one particular. So I think sometimes we have this like golden image of what school looks like, but when you
Yeah.
really look at what it looked like, is it what you think you want for your kids? And a lot of
Yeah.
times it's not. And there's just, so many resources out there. Our kids are constantly with other kids. I actually did add it up at one point because somebody really questioned it. And our kids particularly were with other kids other than their siblings for about 30 hours a week. And that's not including just general like out and aboutness, but between
Yeah.
activities, homeschool activities, church activities. So it's like, how many more hours
I know.
could you, even if you are just that type of scheduled person, what does it look like? What do the numbers look like? It's, pretty comparable to other kids. So on top
Well,
of, I mean, they have siblings, so they're with kids all the time.
exactly. Yeah. It's interesting that you say it's comparable because I actually don't think it is. And the reason I say that is my friends who are teachers say to their students, you did not come here to socialize, stop talking. So we're if you're comparing 8 hours in school to 8 hours socialized, and it's not apples to apples because you're talking about the 20, 30, 45-minute recess. And recently my school district actually cut it down. So they're not even getting 20 minutes of recess. And they were saying that they have to eat quietly and then they can go play. So then the kids just stop eating because they wanted to go play, right? So they would rush through lunch. So in terms of interaction, are you shoulder to shoulder with another kid? Yeah, but can you actually speak to them and get to know them? Not really, right? Um, I love that you talked about the well-meaning intentions because a lot of times it really is coming from a place of concern. And I definitely understand because I've been on the other side where I didn't know anything about homeschoolers. And I'm like, well, why would you do it outside of being a missionary or a military family or, like, why do people homeschool? And then as I started to do my own research, I'm like, oh no, this is actually a very attractive option. So I understand why people say it. I just wish it would be a more thoughtful comment in terms of, hey, I'm considering this too. Can you share some outlets or can you share some groups or some co-ops or how do you navigate this? Or, hey, maybe asking a question that is a real problem versus just this generic, what do you think? What do you think about socialization or how do you socialize? Well, they're talking to you right now, they're socializing. So that's that.
And that's, I mean, ultimately, we want our kids to be disciples and to be able to go and spread God's word. And in order to do that, you have to people, right? Like you have
And
to be
not
able
just
to,
your
and
own age group, right?
not just your own age, not just your own life experience, not just the neighborhood that you live in. So again, that's something that we look for our kids is where are the opportunities for them to broaden their horizons and meet other people that have different life experiences. And it's a lot of times people think that you're homeschooling because you and your kids are in this bubble and they don't have, what are you that we're just sheltering them and they don't get to have those experiences. And I am definitely sheltering them from some things. There are some things that
Yeah.
we're not doing.
Yeah.
And we're okay saying we're not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But because we homeschool, I feel that they've actually had much broader experiences
Yeah.
because we've been able to look for those positive outlets for them to have those experiences. Um, and we have the time to do that.
Yeah. I agree because when my kids were not homeschooled, what they did in a week would probably be a year's worth of different breaks, right? So last week alone, we did the symphony. We went to a forest. We did like trails and hiking. We did the beach. We did Royal Rangers, which is like a Christian Boy Scout. Um, and I can't remember. We did so many other things, but that's just like over 2 days, all the things that I just mentioned. It was a Tuesday, Wednesday that they did all of that. But if they were in school full time, that would be something that we did over the summer or over a winter break, right? So like their experiences just in a day, whether it's from the aquarium to Legoland to this place or from the park to the beach, it is a lot that's happening.
And then the other topic I'm going to talk about is how do you get connected? Once you're
Okay.
homeschooling, how do you get connected? How do you find these other people? How do you find groups? What types of groups are there? Homeschooling has this whole other lingo that you have to learn. There's abbreviations
And
and,
co-ops,
co-op. What does co-op mean? Co-op can mean a whole lot of different things.
right? Like not a
So
condo?
yep. So understanding that just because somebody says, "Oh, I have a co-op," what does that mean? What kind of questions do you ask to get the details of that? Because a co-op can mean 4 days a week, all day. It can mean 1 day a week, every 2 weeks, and
Mhm.
everything in between. It can mean that you drop your kids off. It means that you go and you teach. What do all of those things mean? And what does that look like for your family?
Mhm.
In the North Hills of Pittsburgh, we're very fortunate. There is a thriving homeschool community here. There are tons of resources that looks different for other people in other parts of the state. Not every area has tons of options.
Right.
So how do you choose what's going to work for your family?
Mhm.
What are you going to invest your time into, your finances? Is it worth driving to? There's
Right.
been things that we've participated in, even in this area, even though there's a lot locally, there's been things that we've participated in that where we've had to drive, 45 minutes to get to and assessing, is that 45-minute drive worth it?
Right.
And a lot of times it has
It
been
is. Yeah.
much worth it. It's worth it to do that versus the thing that's only 10 minutes down the road.
Mm,
How do you assess that for your family? And every family is going to be different. Not every mom and not every family fits into the same box. Just like
right.
with the public school and homeschooling, you don't have to fit in the same box either. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you figure out what works for you? And some of that is trial and error. That and making that decision of like, yeah, this is a great thing, but not for my kids, or maybe not for all of my kids. If
Right.
you've got, they're all individual people and they all have different things. So there's definitely things that we participate in because it meets the needs of one child, but maybe not the other, but maybe we do something else for that child. Up to this point, our kids have all been elementary age, so we've been able to make that work in a variety of
Mm-hmm.
areas. As they get older, will that look different? I don't know.
Okay,
But
well,
yeah. So those are just
and
things
different
that,
doesn't mean bad or good. It just means not
right.
the same.
Yep. Yep. I always jokingly say I've got one daughter that is happy to meet with friends every single day of the week. Her bucket is never full when it comes to that kind of stuff. Then I have two boys. They could care less if they put on pants and leave the house.
Right.
It's, that's just their personality. I mean, they do great playing with other kids, but their bucket gets a lot fuller, a lot faster than
Mm,
what my other child does. So just again, meeting those needs and balancing that and always being open to new things, ending things, starting new things, and doing that. And how do you do that? I had a lot of wise counsel from when I started homeschooling. I loved meeting moms that were in the same path as I was at the same stage of life and all of that. But at the same time, I wanted to talk to the older moms. I wanted to talk to the moms who made it out on the other end.
yep.
And how do you do that? If I'm doing this for the long haul, how do I make it out on the other end? And I was very fortunate that I got older moms that were able to speak words of encouragement and
Mm,
wisdom into me. So I'm very, very thankful to have had that. Um, but that again, appreciating that kids are all different,
right.
families are all different, their needs are all different, and it's okay not to be like the other families and do what you
Exactly.
need. Yeah.
That's a really good point you brought up in terms of how the children are different and some may want to go out every single day and the others may not care. Because I was on a group thread where literally this dad was sharing that his daughter was like, I need a break. There's just too much happening because we had like an end of year celebration, we had a play date, we had a forest day, we had the the event today was supposed to be a meetup to talk about more activities, right? While the kids played. And I think what's important is that you talked about fear earlier. I think what's important is that we as parents don't get into this fear-based parenting where we're throwing all these things on the schedule, putting them into every activity. They're learning every instrument, they're playing every sport because we're afraid of what if they're missing out something, right? But really leaning into the kid and saying, hey, do you want more of this? Do you need less of this? What do you need? And I think that's such unpopular opinion or advice because typically parents don't ask children because the parents are the adults and they're the authority, but the input is really important. So I think it's really critical for us to say to the kids, hey, you're signing for a couple different things, or we've been out a lot. Do you need a break? Do you want more? I have like my middle guy, the 7-year-old, every time we do something, we'll hop into the car and he's like, okay, what are we doing next? And then I'll say H and then I'll start spelling home. And he's like, oh, like, I'm like, guy, we've been out all day. What do you mean you don't want to go home? Whereas some days he's like falling asleep in the car as we're done with like one activity. So I think it's really important to check in with our kids and see what's going on and not really, this whole FOMO, this fear of missing out. Because even for me, I started to like load my schedule with informative information, whether it's like webinars. And like the other day, I was so exhausted. And I looked at my calendar, I'm like, I have an event for high school parents. Like they're going to talk about their experience. And I'm like, my boys are 7 and 9. If I miss it today, I'm sure there's going to be another one over the next 10 years, like not 10 years, but, over the course of time. So I just say all that to say that if a parent is feeling kind of like anxious or overly preoccupied with their child, I think they should talk to the kid and say, how is this working for you? What do you need? And really check in with themselves and say, am I doing this solely because I want the best for my kid? Or am I loading them with activities or not giving them anything because of fear and really checking it there?
And that's too, like my husband and I really stand on that. Like we're raising future adults here.
Yeah,
We're not just raising perpetual children.
yeah,
So how do we set them up for success as adults? And are we teaching them to have that balance and to regulate that balance for themselves? Because even as adults, we all have friends that are super social and out there all the time. And that's their personality. And that's the bucket they need to fill. And then we have, we all have family members, friends, spouses that their bucket gets filled up real quick and they need less.
Yeah. More introverted.
And, yeah. And just, balancing that and helping them develop that skill at an earlier age versus a later. Yeah. Are we doing a good job? Time will tell. Again, I don't have all the answers. I don't have a perfect formula. But that's, again, we want our kids to love learning, be problem solvers, and to be happy. We want to raise happy adults. Not to say that life isn't going to be hard.
Right.
Things are going to be tough. You're going to face tough situations. But we don't want you to enter adulthood so stressed out that you can't process and can't figure out that the hard stuff will end at some point. So yeah, that's a kind of our main philosophy. And that's what we want to encourage other parents and homeschoolers to be able to do, and to push back that, like, no, we're not going to do that. Yeah, it's okay. And there's other people out there also saying, no, we're not going to do that. You're not alone. Yeah.
Why do you have so many good thoughts? Every time I was going to ask you for your final thoughts, I'm like, wait, but I really want to comment on that last great point you made. But, everything you've said like resonated so deeply with me, and I've just been like taking it all in and absorbing it myself too. But you just make the last piece that you said that really ignited something for me is, am I doing a good job? Time will tell. And anytime I ask someone a question and they say, oh, point 1, point 2, point 3, trust the process. I'm like, no, I don't want to trust the process. I want to know all the information now, and I want to know how it's going to turn out, and I want the guarantee, and I want the assurance, and I want the insurance. And I'm like, but that's not how life works. That's not real. So I'm just going to ask you for your final thoughts, because you're going to say something amazing and I'm going to have 20 more thoughts. So what else would you like everyone to know? And what is like something you wish people knew, or maybe that you knew?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we don't know what this is going to result in, right? But I know that if I sent my kids to public school, if I sent them to private school, I'd have the same, maybe it'll work, right? Like, there are plenty of kids that graduate public school not being able to read, not being proficient in a variety of subjects.
Oh my gosh.
Any specific educational path that you put your kid on is not any guarantee for anything. But I know already I've experienced that I will not regret the time that I had with my kids, the experiences that we were able to provide them with, the things that they were able to learn and do, and the childhood they've been able to have. I will not look back and say, man, we didn't go to the park, or we went to the park too much.
Yeah.
Or we went on too many adventures, or we sat down and read too many books together. Right. We made too many crafts. We made too many messes. I really do not see myself looking back on that and regretting that. And any of the moms that I've talked to that now have kids that are grown adults, that are in college, they all share that same sentiment that, oh, those years were long when we were going through them, but man, did they go by quick. Yeah. And they're so thankful that they had that time, even though it was hard at times, even though they had the same unsure, and we are fortunate that we met lots of homeschool graduates, and they are in a wide variety of employment ranges, just like the public school kids, like the private school kids. So it's, God is the one that's in control. I am not. And he tells us not to fear. And that's easy to read. It's hard to do, right? We all have that. But that's why I rest on is that the path that God has them on, just the path that he's put me on, he will put them on one too. And it's my job just to steward them while I have them.
Amen. I love that. The days are long, but the years are short. Come on, come over to CHAP. Check Alicia Hunt out as she talks about socialization and all the things that you need to know to calm your spirit. This has been very calming and reassuring. Thank you so, so much, Alicia, for your time and your wisdom.
Thank you.